Good evening, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to our concert this evening to celebrate the life and work of a very special man, Mr. Geoff Lloyd, B.E.N. My name is Viv John, and I've been a proud member of the Rhondda Symphony Orchestra for over 31 years. But I've had the privilege to know Geoff for far longer than that, as a young musician from Cardiff when Geoff was our youth orchestra conductor, and also as a close colleague and friend of my late mother, Helena Braithwaite. But I'm only one of so many people whose lives have been touched by Geoff, and that's why we're here tonight. Whether you knew Geoff the musician, Geoff the teacher, Geoff the colleague, Geoff the friend, or of course, to the family, Geoff the husband, father, grandfather, partner, or close relative. Indeed, I'm sure for so many of us here, we've been lucky to have had Geoff in our lives, and tonight we'll join together to celebrate him and his legacy. The orchestra will play pieces from Rhondda Simpson Geoff's very first concert back in 1970, Mozart's Magic Flute Overture, and Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Geoff was a very proud Welshman, so we'll reflect that with the lovely Serenade for Small Orchestra by William Mathias. He always encouraged and championed homegrown musicians. And Neil Day's composition, Memoria Prioris, written in memory of Geoff, will represent that. Neil fondly remembers his time as a member of the Rhondda Symphony Orchestra, and he's tried to capture the different sides of Geoff's personality in his piece. See if you can spot them as you listen. And lastly, of course, remembering Geoff the violinist and teacher, we are so pleased that Carl Darby, who was taught by Geoff in his early days in the Rhondda, and then went on to have a hugely successful career as a professional orchestral musician, will be our guest soloist tonight. Peppered between all that music, we'll have speeches and reflections from some of Geoff's closest friends and family. First, we'll hear from Fiona Bennett Heritage, who has kindly stepped in to read Stuart Telling's words. Stuart, unfortunately, is suffering from the dreaded COVID right now, and we wish him a speedy recovery. Later in the first half, we'll hear from Dave Hughes, a local legend of Porthcawl himself, and of course, a long-time friend and colleague of Geoff's. And in the second half, we'll welcome Geoff's daughter, Kath Lloyd, and we'll enjoy the recollections of her dad, I'm sure. You can read further reflections of Geoff's impact and legacy in the programme. Geoff said to his good friend, George Thomas, who I know is in the audience tonight, and I won't bother try and do an impression of Geoff because I won't do it justice. When I go, I want everyone to have a good laugh, no sad stuff. To which George quite correctly replied, as if it could possibly be any other way. So tonight we intend to do just that, and although we may be 2 years late because of the pandemic, we'll honour Geoff's memory in the way that he so richly deserves. So, without further ado, please welcome the Rhondda Symphony Orchestra's leader, Becky Goss, and our musical director, Edward John.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. There's going to be a little bit of a swap-seas with various people moving around in the orchestra. My name is Fiona Bennett, and that's how I was known for many years when I was a member of the Mid Glamorgan Youth Orchestra. I think I may have been the very first female trumpet player. Was I? Gosh, what an honour. They gave me hell. And actually, the last time, or the time before last I saw Carl, we were both at Geoff's funeral service because I was honoured and blessed to be the funeral celebrant who took the service. And Carl was there and he played the Massenet, and he played it very, very close to the catafalque where Geoff's coffin lay, and I was sobbing my heart out behind the pulpit because it was a very, very special moment. So in the programme is my very favourite Geoff Lloyd story, so you'll have to dig through the programme to find that one. But this is my second favourite Geoff Lloyd story. One evening after a full orchestral rehearsal, it was decided that we would have a little concert. Now, you didn't have to play the instrument you played in the orchestra, you could juggle or you could do whatever you wanted. So I got up to sing and play the piano. And Geoff introduced me, or Mr. Lloyd as I knew him then, came on and he said, Fiona Bennett's old bum. So everybody giggled. He said, I'm terribly sorry, I'll read that again. Fiona Bennett's album is doing very well in the Welsh charts, so that's my second favourite. There are just millions, there are so many funny stories. But I'm actually here to read the very special words written by Stuart Telling. So this is not me, Fiona Bennett, or Fiona Bennett Heritage, this is Stuart's words. So before I came to know the legend that was Jeff, I'd heard so many tales about him, but it was only after we started working together I began to learn and understand a great deal more about Jeff. Our friendship developed as we performed in numerous orchestras for choirs and theatre groups. Those occasions were fun, when we enjoyed, endured, or even survived the performances with so many conductors and musical directors. Jeff, through his ability and force of personality, ensured that the orchestra gave excellent standards of performance, and he had that familiar sense of presence in the pit. His acute awareness of all that was happening, often causing a sudden uprightness of posture, was a signal that he was taking charge of the performance. A slight movement of his head was also an indication if something was not performed accurately from any player. Most importantly, he would readily offer a sign or gesture of affirmation or even a comment if somebody performed particularly well. Bill Salomon, former professional horn player and lecturer at Cardiff University, complimented Jeff's ability as a musician and leader and was convinced that he was a more effective leader than many of the professional orchestral leaders with whom he had worked. There was always a funny side to Jeff, says Stuart. I recall an occasion when we were performing the Mikado in Penarth. Before the show, he would often go to the confectionery booth and buy sweets or a bag of salted nuts. In those days, nuts were sold in brown paper bags. Jeff could normally manage to leave the nuts alone until the second half of the show, when there was usually more dialogue and longer gaps between playing. During one excited episode, when Jeff was scrabbling into the bag for his salted nuts, he hadn't realised the grease from the peanuts had weakened the paper bag. Now imagine this. In went his hand, and out went his hand, straight through the bottom of the bag, with nuts spraying around the floor of the orchestral pit. We all enjoyed the entertainment, and so did at least one of the performers on stage. On the Saturday evening performance, Coco, the lead comedy character, rolled onto the stage on his scooter, complete with an umbrella tucked under his arm, scooted around, and during the last chorus of the song, stopped at the front of the stage, took aim, opened the umbrella, and about half a pound of salted nuts rained down on the string section and on Jeff in particular. Lots of fun. As musical director of the Rhondda Symphony Orchestra, Jeff brought internationally renowned soloists to the area to perform with the orchestra. The clarinetist Jack Brymer, who at that time was considered to be one of the leading professional clarinetists of his generation, might have wondered if there was anything left for him to experience, particularly at the Rhondda Sports Centre. During the pre-concert rehearsal of a clarinet concerto, Jeff suddenly broke off at the end of the first movement to explain to his venerable soloist, Jack Brymer, there would be a slightly longer pause than usual between the movements. And this was because the orchestra's principal clarinetist required a little time to change his dentures to a set more suitable for the different mouthpiece he required for the second movement. It's no wonder people don't understand musicians, isn't it? I can't think of too many conductors who could have got away with that and with such aplomb. And Stuart continues, I well remember our visit to the Royal Albert Hall where we shared the stage and accompanied the choir of 1,000 masked Welsh voices. We performed the last movement of Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony as our solo musical item. And in the rehearsal, Jeff became excited and decided we should up the already rather brisk tempo. Just before we started playing, Bill Rogers, the leader, whispered to Jeff, Lloyd, keep it steady. Nobody thinks Jeff heard, because it went like the clappers, as he would call it. So, some bullet points here about what Stuart remembers about Jeff in particular. A particularly good musician who retained his awareness of all matters topical in music and was able to rapidly recall all music he heard, even till the end. He was kind, he was helpful, and he was supportive to musicians of all ages. Someone who was a friend once so realistically described him, a man of his time. I'm sure he would never have fitted in nowadays as a politician with the woke brigade, because he was never shy in sharing his views on a range of issues and being so politically incorrect. Fiona Bennett's or bum, for example. A good friend, jovial and most convivial company. Yes, he would spill his beer and his nuts and his crisps everywhere, but everybody knew he was going to do that. Not such a great driver, either in early life or in his car, or latterly in the electric scooter. The Pope Mobile, which he drove with gay abandon around the pavements and streets of Porthcawl, often very nearly bumping into whoever or whatever happened to be in the way. Somebody of tremendous courage, to have battled with his strokes that totally changed his life, and then to have constantly maintained that sense of optimism about life. All the time without complaining about the severe change of lifestyle he'd endured. He often commented that there were so many people who were so much worse off than he. And Stuart says, I always left feeling better for having been in his company. We chatted about sport, authors, poets, and also wonderful recollections of musical experiences and joy from his association with the Glam and the Nash. And just to conclude, one of the people Jeff referred to was Joyce Grenfell, who particularly enjoyed her work. So Stuart has asked me to read this to you before I finish. Thank you all very much indeed. If I should go before the rest of you, break not a flower, nor inscribe a stone. Nor when I'm gone speak in a Sunday voice, but be the usual selves that I have known. Weep if you must, parting is hell, but life goes on, so sing as well. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
I would like you to know that Jeff left these instructions for his funeral. I would like Dave Hughes to say a few words and take the mick out of me. Due to the pandemic, I was unable to go to Jeff's funeral, so now's my chance. Jeff loved going to funerals. He loved to catch up with the friends that he hadn't seen for a while. Eleanor, my wife, and I were pleased to take Jeff in his wheelchair to the funerals of two of our dear friends and colleagues, Helena Braithwaite and Brian Clark. On both occasions, a line of people quickly formed a queue to speak to him. I don't know how many times he must have said, "Hello, Vicar." A few years before that, Jeff and I sat together at another funeral. The service was underway and it was time for the first hymn. As the organist played the introduction, Jeff nudged me in the ribs. "Die." From his inside pocket of his jacket, he proudly produced a newly acquired pair of reading glasses with a string on them to go around his neck. The only thing was that the string was wrapped around the glasses. Now, if you know Jeff, you know how chaotic he could be, and it took him hold of the first verse to untangle the string. Then he had to put the string over his head, catching it on his ears, round his nose, till finally they ended up where they were supposed to be. By now, we were both laughing so much, neither of us could sing any of the hymn. Well, they do say that everyone should have a friend who they probably shouldn't sit out next to at a serious event. Nothing was safe in Jeff's hands except for his violin. It became a part of him. And what a brilliant violinist he was. He was always in great demand as an orchestral player, very often as leader, and must have played much of the major repertoire over and over again. I'm sure he could play lots of it in his sleep. In fact, he said to me once, "I had a dream last night that I was playing Messiah, and I woke up and I found I was." Jeff said that he got much of his sense of humour from his mother, who would say things like, "Eat your carrots up, Geoffrey. They're good for your eyes." "Will they make me see better, ma'am?" "Well, you'll never see a donkey wearing glasses." Jeff loved to interact with everyone, and there was an occasion when he was leading the orchestra for Orbit Theatre's production of Mr. Pickwick in the new theatre in Cardiff. The company had decided to raise the level of the orchestral pit to the stage level so that the audience could see the orchestra play the overture before being lowered out of sight for the rest of the show. There was a lady of advanced years in the front row who was not happy about this, about the fact that she wouldn't be able to see the stage because the orchestra was in the way. She leant forward and started complaining to Jeff. Jeff said, don't worry, love, if I lean a bit to the left and move the music stand forward, you should be able to see through the gap. Although there might be a bit of a shadow from my nose. Jeff had a thing about the size of his nose. He would often sign his Christmas cards, Jeff the nose, and then put a drawing of a nose in case you didn't understand it. On one occasion, not long after Jeff had grown a splendid moustache, the late great trombonist Phil Morgan said to him, "Nice moustache, Lloyd. I'm surprised it can grow in the shade." So, back to the new theatre. So the overture began with the woman in the front row still complaining and bobbing about, trying to imagine how she would be able to see the show. As the end of the overture approached, the button was pressed backstage and the pit lift started descending. Just before he disappeared from sight, Jeff gave the woman a knowing wink. She leant forward over the pit rail and she said to him, "You're a bugger, aren't you?" Jeff Lloyd was a one-off. There was never a dull moment when he was around. He was not only a brilliant musician, but also a great character who did an enormous amount for music in South Wales. Along with so many other people, I miss him very much. But there is one thing that we should always remember, and that is that he was also a very naughty boy.
Wow, what a fabulous evening. Well, I am my father's daughter, and apparently I talk quite a lot, or I don't believe it myself. But I'm going to try and achieve something he never did in his life, and that's to do a short speech. Okay, so it's basically a series of thank yous from Richard and myself and all the family. The first thank you is to you, the audience. You can spot a lot of familiar faces, some of Dad's contemporaries, and some younger people who he may have taught or would have passed through one of the many youth orchestras he conducted. But however you knew him, we know he would have made a lasting impact on you, because to meet Jeff once was so in forever. So after he died, we received many lovely emails and cards and messages saying how he'd supported people in their careers in music and teaching, and how he'd put in a good word here and there, and how he'd sort of elevated people up and advanced people's careers, because again, that's the sort of guy he was. But the words that kept coming up in these messages were hilarious, supportive and inspirational. And it's a source of huge joy to us as a family that many of you play your instruments because of him, that you might have gone into teaching because of him, and you might have had a musical career. Carl Dowy's a case in point, because you met him. And that's a huge joy for us, so thank you for making the trip. The second thank you is to the contributors. The first part of my speech was, this bit was going to be to Dave Hughes and Stuart Telling, but obviously Stuart's laid up with COVID, so I must thank Fiona Bennett Heritage, who yet again has stepped into the breach. She did that with Dad's funeral as well because of COVID, so there were some last minute changes, and I didn't have anybody to take the funeral service 3 days before, but she stepped in because she's also a celebrant as well as an incredible musician. So Dave and Stu, thank you so much for those lovely words about Dad, those funny stories. We thought we knew all the stories about Dad, but obviously not. You were both great friends to Dad, along with many other people who are here tonight who were great friends of Dad's. And we do remember all the ways you supported him when he was in pretty poor health, and the lifts you gave him, etc. So just thank you for reminding us of the man he was. Neil Day, oh wow. That composition has absolutely blown all our minds, I know that. How many people get a piece of composition just for them? So Neil sent Richard and I a digitised version of that last year, and said, "Is it okay?" And we said, "Yeah." But tonight it was just another level of gorgeousness. It was absolutely brilliant. And Neil wanted to capture Dad's playful side and his mischievous side, which we know is very strong, but also his more serious and contemplative side, which he didn't show very often, but it was there. So thank you so much, Neil. And Carl Darby, now Carl's going to hate this bit because I'm going to say nice things about him. I'm always like his annoying younger sister. So as many of you know, Carl was one of Dad's many talented and gifted pupils, and he had a lot of those. And Carl went on to have a very successful career in music. And when Dad was near the end of his life and we could see things weren't looking too good, I said to Carl, look, if you're going to go and visit him, do it soon. So, bless him, the very next day, Carl and Birdie, Robert Bird, Bob, went to see Dad in his nursing home and spent a couple of hours with him, and he just came to life. He was, you know, swapping stories and lots of reminiscences, and his little kindnesses like that we remember. And lots of people visited Dad at the end of his life, and during his life, obviously, but towards the end when he was really quite poorly, and we'll never forget that. So thank you to all of you who did that. And then Carl then kindly agreed to play at Dad's funeral, and where he played the Massenet that we heard tonight, the meditation, and he was accompanied by Merrin Williams, who also did a beautiful job, and it was one of the most moving parts of the ceremony. So to hear him play that again tonight, as well as the Schindler's List theme, has been fantastic. So thank you, Carl, and I will get you a beer later. Okay. Which brings me to the final thank you of the evening, and that's the RSO. When Dad set up the orchestra in 1968 at the suggestion of our mum, because he was expressing frustration that he wasn't able to conduct, she said, well, you know, and a few musicians set up your own orchestra. And little did he know then that 54 years later it would still be going strong, and I don't think it's ever been better. Okay, so the standard of playing tonight has been phenomenal. So, as many of you know, Dad's funeral was quite a depleted affair because of COVID. Lots of people reluctantly couldn't come. They didn't feel safe, and they probably were right. Although it was quite well attended, all things considered. The funeral was held on the very last day of any kind of normality in the country, because we woke up in the hotel the next morning and it had closed for 2 years. And on the Monday then it was full lockdown. So it wasn't the send-off that we would have wanted for Dad. And Dave Hughes said at the time, look, don't worry, we'll get a memorial organised. We were in the process of talking about what we would do and when, and then the RSO said they would make their first spring concert after COVID and dedicate it to Dad. So thank you so much for that, because it's been unbelievable. And I know it's not over yet, so I'll shut up in a minute. Thank you so much for choosing Porthcawl as the venue, because Dad was so happy here. And as has already been alluded to, he loved to terrorise the locals going up and down the prom with his mobility scooter, nearly taking out small children and animals, but no dogs were injured, Fiona, no animals were injured. And he just loved a good storm, and he loved seeing the sea crashing up against the lighthouse. He would actually phone us to tell us that he'd seen that. And he also loved, probably the most that he loved, a lot of his friends lived here. And then when Angela moved across, you know, that was the icing on the cake. And Angela looked after Dad beautifully right at the end of his life. And we're so grateful to her for that. So, I'm nearly done now. So thank you, Ted and Viv, John, Colin Priest, Mark Wells and Nia for sorting out the tickets. And the whole of the orchestra, you have been unbelievable. We are, as a family, blown away by everything you've done. There will be some money behind the bar downstairs later on. This is our way of saying thank you. So if you'd like to come and join us, we'd love to see you. If I look at any of you blankly, please tell me who you are, because the passage of time and menopause fog may mean I don't know who you are. I don't recognise you straight away. So it's been incredible. Thank you to all of you. And Dad, we did it. Okay.